So, it's almost party time. Simple is better than complex. Our next speaker is Marlene Mhangami, right? And is talking about teaching Zimbabwean girls how to code with Puppy Linux. Okay?
Okay. Hi, everyone. Yes, hello. My name is Marlene, and this is my talk, Simple is Better Than Complex, teaching Zimbabwean girls how to code with Puppy Linux. So you probably will recognize this phrase if you are a Python programmer. It's actually from the Zen of Python. So just to tell you a little bit about myself to get started. I am a Zimbabwean, so I actually came to this conference from Zimbabwe. It was a very long flight, about 16 hours. I really enjoy living in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is a really cool place to be. We have the Victoria Falls, which is one of the places I would actually recommend for you to visit before you die, at least once. So just come and speak to me if you ever need a tour of Zimbabwe. Another thing about me is that I'm the previous vice chair and a director of the Python Software Foundation. And if you've never heard of the PSF is a nonprofit organization behind the Python programming language. And the goal of the PSF, or the mission of the PSF, is to promote and protect and to advance the Python programming language and to support the growth of a diverse and international community of Python programmers. So I was actually on the board of directors for the PSF for about 5 years, and I recently stepped away from the board about 2 months ago, just to give space for new leadership and for new ideas, which I think people should do. And I really believe in the mission of the PSF, and if you want to find out more information, visit python.org. I am also, another Pythonic thing about me is that I'm the previous chair of PyCon Africa, which is the annual gathering of the Python community on the continent of Africa. We organized, I was the chair of the first conference, and it was very stressful, so I can imagine the organizers of this conference, I can probably relate to the stress of that. But it was really, really fun. There are tons of people. There are a couple of people actually here at this conference that were part of organizing that. Daniele was one of those people, Noah, Muhewe, Abigail, were all part of that. And if you would like to attend PyCon Africa, we'll probably have it again next year or in 2024, so please follow PyCon Africa for that. Currently for my day job, I work as a developer advocate for Voltron Data. I work for them remotely, and Voltron Data is a company that does a lot of work with big data analytics. So if you've ever heard of Apache Arrow, we do work around that, and also about a Python project called IBIS as well. And whenever I tell people that I'm a developer advocate, they're just like, what does that actually mean? Like, what do you do? And what it actually means for me, it differs from company to company. But half of my work is software engineering, and half of my work is like communication related. So I really enjoy writing and speaking and just talking to people. Before that, I was at NVIDIA, actually, and I was working as a software engineer, just working on Python. And I enjoyed that. I was actually working on a project called QDF. That's like a GPU data frame library that actually runs only on Ubuntu. So that's a very cool project if you're looking for GPU stuff. But I really love to communicate with people. I love to talk to people. And so moving to Voltron allowed me to kind of experiment with that. So I'm having a good time there. And please check out voltrondata.com or follow them on Twitter. And then a final thing about me is that I am the co-founder of a nonprofit organization called ZimboPy. And the majority of this talk is me going to be sharing my journey, creating ZimboPy, and why I felt it was necessary or meaningful work to work on ZimboPy. And I'm also going to be talking about the challenges that we faced when we started this organization and how Ubuntu was actually a part of solving or overcoming some of those challenges. So first of all, what exactly is Zimbabwe? Like I mentioned, it's a nonprofit organization, and the goal of Zimbabwe, when I first created it, is to get Zimbabwean girls excited about the world of computer science and about the world of technology in general. I created it in 2017, and I also wanted it to be a way to provide access or resources for girls in my community to actually be able to take tangible steps to get into the world of software engineering or the world of technology. And actually, I created this organization during a time when I was going through my own sort of existential crisis. I mentioned that I live in Zimbabwe, but I actually was studying in the United States just before I created this organization, and I was there studying molecular biology. I was on the pre-medicine track, and when I was studying, I just realized that I don't think I want to be a doctor anymore for a number of different reasons. One of the reasons is that doctors actually have to see blood a lot, and that's like an issue for me. And no one actually tells you that when you are trying to be a doctor, or when you're watching movies about doctors, like you don't see the blood. So for me, I then discovered that, amongst other things, and decided this was not the path for me. And so I had about a year where I could go back home to Zimbabwe, and I took that time to really sort of soul search and figure out what were some things that I felt I was passionate about, some things that I felt I wanted to work on, that maybe, felt like a better fit for me and also felt really meaningful too. And so Zimbabwe is actually one of the things that came out of that time of soul searching when I went back home to Zimbabwe. So there were a number of reasons or things that I felt were an important part about why I think working to get Zimbabwean girls excited about the world of technology, or about computer science, was meaningful work. But today, I'm only going to talk about two of those things. And the first one is that I wanted to increase the representation of women in the world of technology. And I wanted to do that in Zimbabwe specifically, and I'll talk a bit about why I feel like representation is really important. A second thing is that I wanted to increase the access that the girls had to the world of computer science and the world of software engineering, and I'll also talk about that, like I mentioned earlier. So the first thing is about representation, and I think that the word representation, the word diversity and inclusion as well, is like very overused these days, and so it actually becomes this buzzword that doesn't feel like it has any real meaning. But I really think, for me, I believe that representation is a really powerful thing, and it's a really critical part of how we should move forward in the tech industry to really achieve our capacity as a human race as we go forward in the future. So to actually share a bit more about this, I'm going to sort of talk about the concept of transcendence to be able to explain why I think this is important. So to do that, let me play a quick video clip for us today. Now, how do I, oh, nope. How do I play the clip? How do I do this? Oh, hang on, sorry. I think I have to drag it. There we go. Okay, that's the clip. And I am personally not a big fan of football or soccer, whichever one you would like to choose. But in this scene that you observed on this screen, I've seen this happen multiple times. This particular clip is actually from a soccer game or something in the UK, but this sort of activity happens in Zimbabwe, and I'm sure it happens in Prague and other areas around the world. And my question today is, what exactly is going on in this clip? Like, why are these people reacting in this way? Now, a few years ago, the New York Times published an article titled "Sports Psychology, It Isn't Just a Game." And researchers from the article found that many fans became so tied to their teams that they experienced hormonal surges and other psychological changes watching the games just as much as the athletes playing in them did. So this quote by a professor called Robert Cialdini was in that article, and he says, "Our sports heroes are our warriors. This is not some light diversion to be enjoyed for its inherent grace and harmony. The self is centrally involved in the outcome of the event. Whoever you root for represents you." Another quote from this article that I thought was really interesting was from a professor called James Dabbs. And he was quoted as saying, "The results suggest fans empathize with competitors to such a degree that they mentally project themselves into the game and experience the same hormonal surges the athletes do." So I think this phenomenon, or this idea that humans are such interesting creatures that we have the ability, when we feel inspired by someone, to literally transcend our bodies and literally like project ourselves into the same space as the person who is inspiring us, that we actually feel the same hormonal changes that they do or the feelings that they're feeling. And I remember trying to think to myself, okay, when have I experienced something like this sort of transcendental experience? And I thought about my experience growing up. So for me, growing up, my dad was really into tennis. And I remember quite a few days, quite a few mornings where my whole family would come into the lounge and we would watch a big tennis game together. And one of my favorite people to watch was this woman on the screen, Serena Williams. Do I have any Serena Williams fans in here? I have 2, 3, yes, exactly. Good, I have some good Serena Williams fans, and she's just retired, which is a little sad. But I can remember watching this one game with Serena in it, and I was so nervous for her, and I remember just every single shot she took, I was just like, my breath was held, and every time she won a point, I was like super, super excited. Every time she lost, I was like, it was just very, very exciting. And I was quite young when I started watching those games. And I remember after she won this one match at Wimbledon, going to my parents and saying, "You know what? I'm the next Serena Williams. It's me. I'm going to be Serena. I basically look exactly like her. And she's just at Wimbledon, and if you just give me the resources to do this, I could be the next Serena Williams." And after that, I actually went to my school, and I ended up becoming the captain of my tennis team, and really doing quite well in tennis. I unfortunately didn't make it to Wimbledon, and I think that's my parents' fault, but that's another story. But I really, that experience for me, what it was, I felt so inspired by someone who I felt, here is another black woman who actually, in my head, looks exactly like me, and she's playing at Wimbledon, and if Serena can do that, so can I. Now, one of my favorite quotes is by a lady called Marian Wright Aldman, and she says, "You cannot become what you cannot see." And I think this is a really, really powerful quote, and it's a really good thing for us to think about, even when we're thinking about representation in tech. So I think it's possible, but very difficult to become something if you just have no idea about it. I don't think it's almost impossible for someone to really think to themselves, I want to go to Wimbledon, after they've never seen a tennis match being played before, or they've never seen a woman playing at Wimbledon before. And so because of that, I think even in the world of technology, we need to be thinking about how it feels for someone, sometimes we really think, oh, we need more women in tech, but sometimes the blocker for that is just there being no women in tech as well. That's also something that's quite a difficult thing. And so for me, as part of my mission with ZimboPi, is I wanted to give Zimbabwean girls some role models to look at. and women that were in the tech industry, not only in Zimbabwe, but around the world. So something we started doing was hosting mentorship weeks, where we had women from within the industry coming and sharing their experiences about working as software engineers or managers or designers or whatever it was. And I think this is a really key part of that, is amplifying voices of women who are doing extremely well in the tech industry. The second thing was that I wanted to provide access. So it's one thing to encourage people and say, yes, you can do it, get into tech, you're going to be amazing, study computer science. And it's another thing to actually give them practical steps to let them know, hey, this is how you can actually become a computer scientist. This is actually how you write code. And I wanted to provide a space for that. Something else that was a key part of that for me was the democratization of knowledge and opportunity. So initially when I started this organization, because it was much easier, I started in like much wealthier parts of the city, and we were teaching at sort of hub spaces where they gave us space and they had laptops already. And all of the girls that came were from well-off families that could go back home, and they had laptops with their families. But I started to think that, this is not really fair just to have the girls that already have access to come and use these laptops, but we also need to be providing the same sort of access to girls in underserved areas of the city. So that was something that I started to actively work on. And so we actually set up a club, we set up 2 clubs in some under-resourced areas of the city. And when we did that, there were some challenges that we came up with. And fortunately, at the time, I didn't have money. I was actually running a lot on vibes, and it was just like, I just don't know what I'm doing, and I'm just going to see what happens. But actually, someone at a conference sponsored a couple of old laptops for us to use for these clubs in the under-resourced areas. And when they did that, it was awesome that we had these laptops to use, but they were really old laptops. And another thing is that the community centers as well were quite difficult to work on. So there were a couple of different challenges that we faced. So one of the things, like I said, the laptops were old and they were really slow to use. Another thing is they had low memory capacity, so they would easily crash, and that was like a very difficult thing for me to work with. Something else, there was no internet connection at these community centers that we were working out of. Sometimes there was internet access, but it was very, very slow. And then the final thing is that we had lots of girls in the community that had never used a laptop before, and that was quite challenging to try and introduce them to using laptops in the clubs. So one of the things that was a really big relief to me when I found out about it, a friend of mine actually told me about it, was Puppy Linux. And Puppy Linux is actually built from Ubuntu, and it's a really great OS. It's very lightweight, and there were a number of reasons why this was an excellent choice for us and why it was really useful for us in these under-resourced areas. The first thing is that Puppy is relatively small. It's about 300 megabytes or less, and it can run completely from RAM. So really, really useful. You can just plug it, you can download it onto a USB, and you can use it completely from RAM. So this is amazing for old computers that have very little space, and it also means that the system runs much faster as well. Secondly, ease of use. So Puppy Linux actually has all of the apps in the OS are labeled by what the apps do instead of the name of the app, and I thought this was super useful because the girls didn't know since they were using a computer for the first time. They didn't really know the names of the different apps, but then it would actually show this is what the app is for instead as the label, and I thought that was such a great thing for first-time users. Another thing is that it was ready to use, so we really didn't have to download a lot of new software from the internet when we were getting started, and that was really helpful as well because there was no internet. And then a final thing is that Puppy is actually optimized to support older computers. So it ran really well, it ran really efficiently, and it was super easy to set up when we first started going as well. You know, just plugging in a USB and setting it up that way and booting it up that way. So the point of this talk is not to be super technical or anything like that. I want to share that I don't think you need to start a nonprofit. And personally, I think it's very difficult, and I've taken several breaks, and I'm only getting back into it because of how hard it is actually to try and solve problems in the world. It's very easy to get burnt out and things like that. But I don't think you need to start a nonprofit to actually do meaningful work. Building thoughtful software is meaningful work. And I think building people who build software or open OS systems or run, you know, build open source software in general that not only thinks about the most cutting edge case and how can we build better software for big tech or whoever, you know, in that case, but also thinking, hey, how can I build, you know, my software? How can I make my operating system or whatever it is, my project, to be able to also serve people in different parts of the world in under-resourced areas as well. And I actually think that's really meaningful work to do. So that's something that I would like to encourage everyone here that's at this conference as you go back into your work and you work on Ubuntu or whatever distributions or flavors of the work that you're working on, not just to think about big tech or the most cutting edge, but you know, maybe think about some of the girls in this club that are in Zimbabwe. So final thing, as I've sort of started back, I took a break like I mentioned, but starting back up, one of the things I would like to do, or I'm aiming to do, is to create a network that will provide some opportunities for the girls in our clubs to be able to get internship opportunities if they can. And once we, you know, I'm hoping to sign up people who would be interested in maybe mentoring some of the students or also be part of this network as your company that can also provide opportunities for the girls in our clubs. And if you're interested in that, the QR code is on the screen, or you can just go to that link. You can also reach out to me. I am Marlene_ZW on Twitter, and I'm happy to talk there. And that is the end of my talk. Thank you.
So we have 2 minutes for questions. There.
Hi there. The focus of your organization seems to be girls in your city, in underserved areas of your city. How would you compare your efforts to something like She Codes Africa, which is more a West African thing, but much broader in scope?
I love She Code Africa. Thanks for bringing that up. And I think that She Code Africa, one, they've been running for a long time. I know Ada. And I think the community in West Africa, honestly, is the tech community in West Africa is more built out. It's stronger than the community in Southern Africa. Well, at least in Zimbabwe, I think the community in South Africa is quite strong. But in Zimbabwe, the tech community is really, I think, still in the early stages. And so because of that, like, I know when I was first getting started, I tried to go to companies and try to ask for like help or things like that. And they just don't have any idea of what I'm talking about and like not really at the stage where they can help, I guess. And so I would say one of the advantages of being in West Africa is that the tech community there is really mature.
Yeah, wonderful talk, wonderful project. I have a question. What was your biggest challenge in setting up the overall scheme? I mean, you said you were sort of, you know, wandering around and then it sort of came together, but I'm really wondering, like, what was your biggest challenge there?
I think when I first started, I think I wanted to solve like all of the problems, and I thought I could do it by myself as well. I had one of my friends helping me, Ron, and you know, I think I got burnt out really quickly, and that's why I like took a break, because I was trying to do everything. And I also struggled with coordinating volunteers because I found that volunteers would start out very excited, but then like over time they would be inconsistent, and that would be very difficult for the girls as well, and that would throw off the program and things like that. So working with volunteers and trying to do everything by myself was my issue. I think. Thanks for the question.
Hey, thanks. How did you get girls' attention to come to these places, or how they found out?
So we worked directly with the high schools. I communicated with a high school in the area, and we would host the clubs out of community centers. And the community center was, like, they worked with social workers that were connected to the high school, and the social workers would kind of coordinate with the school to recommend girls for us. So I think we started with 30 girls. And just anyone that was interested, I think the social worker went and, I'm trying to remember, I think she went and just made an announcement in the schools, and then the girls came from there. It was just high school students. So.
Hi, Marlene.
Hi.
Thanks for coming. I'm curious, you started off talking about how in an underrepresented place you had trouble getting access to internet, and you were stuck with slow laptops and things that were great educational tools but were still insufficient for you. Have those problems evolved into different problems, or are you still suffering from some of those same things where you don't have access to the actual technology and hardware to accomplish what you want?
So the great thing was that as we went forward, got a great donation from GitHub, and GitHub donated like 20 Macs, which was amazing. And so thank you, GitHub, for doing that. And that really made a big difference, and ultimately ended up just like giving away the old laptops. But I do feel like there are, especially for organizations getting started, even as I want to continue running the organization, I don't see us buying like 30 Macs on our own. I still see us buying like older laptops because you can just get more for the money. And unless we're working directly with a company that will like sponsor laptops or something like that, I still see it being hardware. Like the hardware we're going to use is probably older. Yeah.
Last question, sorry.
Hi, my question kind of connects with your last answer. I know this initiative called labdo.org. I know they develop a lot of laptops to Latin America, Asia, and Africa. I wanted to ask, do you have kind of connection with them, and do they really work? Or does it really have is it successful?
Which was the company you said?
It's labdo.org. It's kind of an initiative which takes computers from companies donated, like kind of reestablished with Ubuntu, like kind of some Ubuntu image, and send them with partners to the countries.
Okay, I haven't heard of that organization before, but I will say that I don't think when you are working with like people for the first time and like just trying to teach them the basics of code, I really don't think you need like complicated operating systems or complicated like hardware in general. And so old laptops are literally just fine when you are working in some of those areas. So I do think companies like that are fantastic if they are doing that. I haven't worked with that specific company, but I still think it's great that they're doing that.
Thank you, Marlene. 2 minutes, and then we came for the closing session with Philippe. So, short break.